Here today for the 2026 NYSCA Reserve Fund Grants info session. This is one of two info sessions, and today we will be going over an application overview. We'll be recording today's session, and it will be posted to NYFA's website within 1 week of today's live session. For today on Zoom, we do have closed captioning available. You can start that by clicking the button on your Zoom screen that says CC. And before we get started, I will just introduce some of my NYFA colleagues who will be supporting me on today's session. And I'll first pass it over to Kenny.
Hi, my name is Kenny Shiloh Russell. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a program officer on the grants team, and today I'll just be assisting Audrey on the back end, as well as sending some links throughout the presentation in the chat. And I'll pass it over to Sarah.
Thanks, Kenny. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah O'Connell. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the director of NYFA Grants. I want to give just a brief introduction to NYFA to everyone here before I pass it back over to Audrey for the main presentation, just in case this is your first point of contact with us. So we have a lot of different offerings at NYFA, and there are kind of four main categories. The first is our awards and grants department, where we distribute grants to artists and arts organizations, the NYSCA Reserve Fund Grant being one of them. We offer unrestricted, project-based, and emergency grant programs, and we have 15 active ones right now, 5 of which have open applications. So I would definitely recommend checking out the link in the chat and seeing if you or folks from your creative community might be eligible for one of them. NYFA also has a fiscal sponsorship program, which allows individual artists and emerging arts organizations to raise funds using NYFA's 501c3 tax-exempt status. This opens up possibilities to access funding that otherwise wouldn't be available to an individual without the fiscal sponsorship. We also have a learning department, which offers a lot of different things, ranging from professional development opportunities for artists and arts administrators, and career advice and coaching. We have online workshops and leadership initiative programs, which I believe there is one that is open for applications right now as well. And then lastly, we have our online resources, which is really kind of a two-parter. One is the NYFA Classifieds, which offers jobs in the arts, artist opportunities, and studio and space rentals. Within that, there is also a volunteer portal, which might be relevant to some of your organizations. Essentially, you can, for free, post for volunteer opportunities that your organization might need. And then the second part of our online resources that I want to mention are our emergency resources. So this is a centralized list of emergency resources for artists across the United States, highlighting opportunities outside of what we're able to offer within our grant programs, and is always something that we are keeping updated with all the changing things that are happening in the country and the world. And yeah, I believe Kenny has been adding links to all of these different resources in the chat, so please feel free to take a look. And I will also just kind of be in the background for the rest of the presentation and might pop back on for the Q&A. But for now, I'll pass it over to Audrey.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, this is one of two information sessions for this program. We hosted our first information session for the Reserve Fund Grants a couple weeks ago on Thursday, March 19th. That was a deep dive into reserve funds. We defined them, talked about the benefits, why your organization might want to start one, and what is a good point for your organization to start or build upon one. We have the recording to that information session if you'd like to watch it or rewatch it if you were there, and we'll put that link in the chat. And then today's information session will go more into the application itself and look into the application questions and the review process. And we will be recording it and posting it to NYFA's website. So if you miss any part of it or you'd like to refer back to it, you can go to the Reserve Fund Grants page within a week. And then also we have a panelist nomination form open. We are currently accepting panelist nominations. Just to note that current staff or board members of an organization that is applying to the 2026 program cannot serve as panelists. So I'm guessing if you're here, you plan on applying. But if you do know somebody in your network or work with a consultant or maybe a past staff member who you think would make a good panelist, please recommend them. Panelists are integral to this grant-making process. They can be New York State-based cultural workers, community leaders, and artists, and they'll be tasked with reviewing the applications through multiple scoring rounds, and then it will culminate in a virtual panel discussion. And panelists do receive an honorarium based on the amount of applications that they review, and they will be noted at the time of the announcement. And the nomination form is open, and then it will close on Tuesday, April 14th. An agenda for today's info session, we will start with a grant overview and the eligibility. Then we'll go to how to apply, and then we'll look at all of the application questions and share some helpful tips, and then the evaluation and selection process, and then we'll end in a Q&A. For the Q&A, we will be using the Q&A function on Zoom, which is a box that has a question mark on it. You're welcome to send in questions throughout the presentation. We just ask that you wait until I go over the section that you have a question about, just in case I do go over it in the presentation. But we should have a good amount of time for questions, so feel free to drop them in there. Okay, a program overview. The NYSCA Reserve Fund Grants, or RFG, will provide grants for NYSCA-funded organizations to use towards stabilizing their budgets by establishing a reserve fund or building on an existing one. Individual grant amounts will be awarded in accordance with the applying organization's operating budget, up to $50,000. And for this year, the Reserve Fund Grants will award a total of $1,760,000 in grants. And this program was conceived by the New York State Council for the Arts, or NYSCA, and is administered in partnership with the New York Foundation for the Arts. And applications are currently open. They've been open for a couple of weeks, and they will close on Tuesday, May 5th, 2026 at 5 p.m. Eastern. Okay. For eligibility for this grant, this program is open to nonprofit arts organizations based in New York State who have received direct funding from NYSCA in the last 3 fiscal years and have a current operating budget between $150,000 and $3 million. So to break that down a little bit further, applicants must be a nonprofit organization with a primary mission to support arts and culture, either incorporated in or registered to do business in New York State with a location in New York State and recognized as tax exempt under the Internal Revenue Code section as a 501c3. And organizations that are fiscally sponsored by another 501c3 are ineligible, as well as organizations that are embedded in non-arts 501c3 organizations. Your organization must have a operating budget between $150,000 and $3 million for the current fiscal year. And you must have received direct funding from NYSCA at least once in the past 3 fiscal years. So that would be FY24, FY25, and/or FY26. And the only requirement is that you have received NYSCA funding at least once. So it can be throughout multiple years, but as long as you've received it at least once in the past 3 fiscal years. And this needs to be direct funding from NYSCA, so regrants from organizations other than NYSCA would not meet this eligibility criteria, including NYSCA-funded regranting programs. And then this is also a one-time grant. So if you received a NYSCA Reserve Fund grant in the past, you would not be eligible to apply this year. Okay, the grant award itself. So if you are awarded, applicants will receive a monetary reserve fund grant with the award amounts based on your organization's operating budget. So if your organization's operating budget is between 150K to 500K, you would be awarded up to $20,000. If your operating budget is between 500K through 1 million, you would be awarded up to $35,000. And then if your operating budget is 1 million through 3 million, you would be awarded up to $50,000. And then along with the monetary award, you will also receive optional supplementary technical support and guidance. We work with a consultant to provide this. And if you receive it, you'll have the opportunity to participate in a virtual workshop that's dedicated to organizational reserve funding strategies to support long-term sustainability. You can also sign up for 1 hour-long one-on-one consulting session. And then there will also be monthly office hours that focus on different topics connected to reserve funds. And this is in a communal setting with the other awardees. So you're also able to talk to each other about things that are coming up, as well as experts in the field. And these are all optional, and they're meant to support you through creating a reserve policy, starting your reserve fund, building on your reserve fund, and help you with any questions you might have through that process. We have a reserve fund overview. We went over this much more in depth in the first information session, but to kind of summarize the definition we use for reserve funds, our reserve funds are a pool of funds intentionally set aside by the board of directors to support an organization's financial and long-term sustainability. Reserve funds are savings that help mitigate risk for nonprofit organizations, and the size and function of a reserve fund will vary for each organization and each organization's different goals and needs. And the goal of this program is to help organizations either create or strengthen their cash reserves. And then we also have some benefits for starting or building a cash reserve. And this is to help get you thinking about why your organization might want to start or build upon one, and the different needs your organization might have. So some benefits include strengthening an organization's ability to weather financial challenges and unexpected expenses, enhancing future-facing balance sheets to leverage additional funding, supporting strategic planning and capacity building, ensuring an organization can manage itself rather than relying solely on funders' decisions, helping to manage unexpected losses such as funding cuts, pandemics, or financial downturns. And it can also help manage cash flow and cover when grants or donations are coming in unevenly. It can also allow for the covering of property repairs and replacements and capital improvements, as well as helping organizations experiment and expand risk-taking programming, which is extra relevant to arts and cultural organizations. How to apply. So we receive all of our applications on Submittable. Again, the application's open, so you can start a draft today. You can always start a draft and then come back to your application and edit it until you are ready to submit. And then when you're ready to submit, you'll want to scroll to the bottom, click submit, and then you will receive a confirmation email just confirming that everything went through. Make sure you are receiving that email just to make sure nothing happened. Sometimes it goes to spam, so you can check that. But again, you can begin your application online. Before you make it to the actual application contents, there will be an eligibility form that you will have to fill out, which has a series of questions just to make sure that you are eligible for the grant. And then if you do that successfully, you'll be taken to the application itself. The deadline to submit is Tuesday, May 5th at 5 p.m. Eastern. 5 p.m. Eastern is when the application shuts down and you can no longer hit submit. So make sure you're giving yourself ample time before that. We are not able to grant extensions for this grant, so we recommend always giving at least 24 hours before the deadline to submit. We'll now go into the actual questions on the application form. So just as a summary, the application contents include the organization contact information, organization history and narrative, the reserve fund information, and financial and organizational materials, as well as organization demographics. These demographics are optional, and this is demographic information about the communities your organization serves. So not the person filling out the application or your organization's staff, but again, the communities that your organization serves. And this is not required, but responses are used for internal purposes. And if you do include that, your answers will not be shared with panelists evaluating your application, and all answers will be kept confidential. Going back up to the organization contact information, this just includes your organization's name, the DBA, if that's applicable to you, the address, and your website. It will also include a primary contact name, their role within the organization, email, and phone number. So that is one staff member who you're selecting that we would be in touch with, either if we need further answers for your application. And then they'll also be the one to receive notification emails as well as serve as the primary contact throughout the grant program, especially if awarded. So just make sure it's either a member of the executive or development staff, and it's an active email and phone number, since that is how we'll be getting in contact with you. Okay, after the contact information section, there'll be a section for organization history and narrative. These are questions where we'll collect general and programmatic information about your organization. It will start with organization type, so there'll be a list, but you can share if maybe you're a museum, a presenting organization, etc. Then you'll have your mission statement and then your organizational history. For this question, you can answer when your organization was founded and how your current organizational mission has evolved or shifted since the founding. And for all of these narrative questions, the word limit will be 250 words maximum. If you're able to answer it in fewer, don't feel like you need to stretch your answers, but the maximum will be 250 words. Okay, there then is a question about your programs and activities. So this is where you can describe the programming your organization offers and how it aligns with your mission. So you can go into specific programs. And then there is a question about your audience and community. So who is your target audience? What are their needs? And how are you able to effectively meet them? And then there is an optional place for supporting documentation. This is where you have an option to upload supporting documentation that shows your organization's projects and programs to date as a single combined PDF. So this can be up to 5 pages and should be in one PDF. This can include annual reports, press clippings, news articles, newsletters, testimonials, can include images, programs, anything that really shows your organization in action. And please do not include links in this PDF. It should all be on the document itself. And please do not include anything that would take you away from the document, such as a video link or an external website. Then there will be a section for reserve fund information. At the start of this, you'll be asked to select whether you're applying to start a reserve fund or build upon a reserve fund. Once you select one of them, then a couple of questions will appear. If you select that you are starting a reserve fund, the question will come up of why is your organization seeking to establish a reserve fund? And this is where you can explain the challenges or opportunities that make right now the right time to start a reserve, and why your organization might be in a place of readiness to start a reserve. You can also describe, if applicable, any recent or upcoming organizational changes or challenges, such as leadership changes, operational changes, financial changes, etc. If you are applying to build upon a reserve fund, you'll have the question, what is the current state of your reserve fund and why is right now the time to build upon it? So here you can let us know when your reserve fund was established, how much has been accumulated since then, how it's being managed at the moment, and then similarly, why is right now the right time to build upon it? And then you can also mention if there are any organizational changes that are happening at the moment. And then the second question for both will be, what specific goals do you hope to achieve by either starting or building upon your reserve fund, and what strategies will you use to reach them? So here you should describe how the reserve fund will benefit your organization, both in the short term as well as long term. And you can also include specific strategies for its growth, use, and replenishment. And then for those who are building upon a reserve fund, we will also ask for you to upload your current reserve policy as a PDF. And then for the purposes of this grant, if your organization does have funds that are in savings and or investment accounts, or a rainy day fund or an endowment, but you do not have a formal reserve policy at the time of applying, please apply under starting a reserve fund rather than building upon an existing reserve fund. If you do have funds set aside but not a formal reserve, again, you can apply as starting a reserve fund, but please describe any funds and the current state of them in the narrative questions of your application. If your organization does have designated reserve funds and or board approved reserve policy at the time of applying, then you should be applying under building upon an existing reserve fund. Okay, and then the last part of the application before the demographics are the financial and organizational materials. This helps us determine your eligibility for the grant. So the first question will be, what is your organization's current annual operating budget? Again, this should be between 150,000 and 3 million for you to be eligible. And we first will just ask that in the number form, and then we'll also ask for you to upload your current operating budget. This should be the board approved working budget for the current fiscal year. There is no required template, so you can submit the budget that you are using, but your budget should show operational income and expenses, as well as assets and liabilities, and explanatory notes for each line item where applicable. If anything needs greater detail, you can put that there. And then this should be a budget, so please do not include 990s. And this should be for the current fiscal year, so please don't include any past years or multiple years for comparison. It should only be the current fiscal year. And then there will be questions for you to upload your organization chart. Again, there is no template, so you can upload the one that you use, and this should have the name and title of each staff member. There's also a question for your board of directors. This should have each board member's full name and affiliation, the length of their current term and total years of service, as well as a brief description of each board member. And then we ask you that you upload your documentation of proof of nonprofit status. This should have your organization's name and address in it. And then also proof of NYSCA funding for the past 3 fiscal years. We only require that you upload proof for at least one of the years, and this can be for FY24 funding, FY25, or FY26. And this proof should have your organization's name on it, the NYSCA grant name, the amount awarded, and the date or fiscal year of the award. And the forms of documentation can include a screenshot of your NYSCA portal, your acceptance letter, your final report, or any other official documentation verifying that your organization has received funding within those past 3 fiscal years. And then after that, there will just be a checkbox for you to certify that everything in the application is true. And then you'll be taken to the optional organizational demographic questions. And then once you're finished with that, you can click submit. here we have the requirements. If you are awarded this grant, the funds will be distributed in 2 installments. The first installment of 80% of the total award will be released after you submit your reserve policy to NYFA, and it's approved. And this will be due by March 1st, 2027. You can upload it earlier and receive your first installment earlier, but that is the deadline to submit. And we will have those supplementary services available when you do receive notification of the grant. So there will be technical support offered for crafting and creating your reserve policy, as well as reworking it if you are applying to build upon your reserve fund. But once that is approved, you'll receive 80% of your award, and then the remaining 20% of the award will be released upon your submission of a final report, which is due within 1 year of the notification date. And this report will just confirm that the funds, that first installment, were properly retained in full in an interest-bearing account for a minimum of 3 consecutive months. And just a note here that while reserve funds can be used based off of your reserve fund policy that you'll be submitting, the goal is to avoid spending them unless necessary, allowing the fund to grow over time, since long-term sustainability is the goal of these funds. All right, we are nearing the end of the presentation, but I want to go over the review process. So eligible applications will undergo a 3-round actually review and elimination process. The first 2 rounds are where the panel will independently be reviewing the applications, and the highest scored applications will move forward to the next round. And then the review will culminate in a panel discussion where the final applications will be discussed and the panel will be selecting recipients to recommend to receive the grant. And then all applicants will be notified of the status of their application no later than fall 2026. And then if you do receive the grant, the supplementary support services that have been mentioned would begin starting in October of 2026. And then all applications will be evaluated based off of 3 evaluation criteria. I'll share them today, but they are also listed on the Reserve Fund Grant website under review process. And I do recommend reading through them while you're drafting your application, just to make sure that you are meeting these points. So the first evaluation criteria is the demonstration of organization need. So the organization is at a pivotal stage where there is a clear need to establish or strengthen a reserve fund. The reserve fund aligns with the organization's immediate and long-term financial needs, supporting the broader goals of an organization's mission and strategic plan. And the reserve fund is positioned as a critical component of the organization's future success and sustainability. The second evaluation criteria is community impact. The organization actively serves and engages its community through arts and cultural programming that reflects its mission and the specific needs of its audience. The organization demonstrates a long-standing, active, and mutual connection with the local or artistic community. And the organization plays a key role in the arts and cultural ecosystem, contributing meaningfully to the field and community. And then the last evaluation criteria is feasibility and readiness. The organization shows strong financial management practices, demonstrating the capacity of its staff and board to manage and oversee the reserve fund effectively. The organization provides a clear and detailed strategy for the reserve fund's growth, use, and replenishment with a focus on long-term financial health. And the organization demonstrates how the reserve fund will enable it to expand its programs, reach new audiences, or increase services over time. So this one's very important, showing through your application that your organization is in a place that it's ready to start or build upon a reserve fund, and that you have thought through the strategy behind growing, using, and replenishing the reserves. And with that, we've come to the end of the presentation portion of this information session. We will be moving on to the Q&A in a minute. So if you have any questions that are still lingering, feel free to put them in the Q&A box. If you have a more specific question that you'd like answered, or I don't get to your question today, you can always email us at apply@nyfa.org. And then we also have our website, which has lots of information as well as a pretty extensive FAQ on there as well. So I will give it just a minute and I'll look through some of the questions that have already come in. But thank you all for joining us so far. Okay, just a first question is, are you able to share the slides from each of the two information sessions? So we aren't able to share the actual slideshows, but we will have the recordings. The first one is already up on our website, and then this one will be available within a week. So you can click through the slides that way. Another question we have, is there a downloadable PDF of the application questions that we can refer to before uploading our answers into Submittable? We do have a downloadable PDF of the application guidelines, which does include the application questions on them. It doesn't include the descriptions, but it has the questions. We'll put a direct link to the guidelines in the chat. Yes. Okay, we also have a question. In the application, do we need to commit to exactly what we will be using the funds for, or are we free to use the funds in any of the categories? Thus, do we need to emphasize all the possibilities for how we would use the reserve funds? So in the application, you'll be asked if you're starting a reserve fund, why you would like to start a reserve fund, and what goals you hope to achieve by establishing a reserve fund, and what strategies you'll use to reach them. So you don't need to commit to exactly what the funds will be used for, but having a strong kind of why and describing the need that your organization is in that the reserve fund will address will definitely strengthen your application. And then we do know that things are in flux. So if things change, we are attentive to that. But yeah, a strong proposal will go into more specific whys. Okay, we have a question. How far back would you like us to talk about our past programs? the past year, 2 years, 5 years. So we have a couple of questions in the organizational history section. First, there's the organizational history, which you can describe when your organization was founded, and then any significant shifts that have happened since then. And then there's a question about your current programs where you can go more in depth into your current offerings. So for the program question, that should be everything that you are currently offering. Okay, we have a question. In order to apply for the reserve funds, does our board need to formally establish a reserve policy as part of the process? So I'm guessing this person is applying to start a reserve fund. And if that's the case, then no, your board would not need to establish a reserve policy before applying. That is only pertains to those who are applying to build upon their reserve fund. They will have to upload their current reserve policy. But if you're starting one, then you do not need to have a reserve policy at the time of applying, and it will be part of those technical support services if you do receive the grant to help you in creating a reserve policy to receive your first payment installment. Okay, our next question, if you have significant savings, but nothing is called a reserve fund, does that mean we are establishing a reserve fund? So if you have significant savings, but you do not have a reserve policy in place, then you would apply to start a reserve fund. And then in your application, you can describe the state of your current savings, but you would be applying to start a reserve fund since you don't have a formal reserve policy at the moment. We have a question about receiving feedback on last year's reserve fund grant application. We unfortunately are not able to give feedback on last year's application due to the volume of applicants. If you have any questions about your current draft application, you're welcome to email us at apply@nyfa.org. Our next question for the upload about board members, what sort of things are you looking for in describing the board members? Would you like to know their place of employment, college, education, etc.? So for the list of board members, you'll have to put their name, their place of employment or affiliation, their current length, current term as a board member, their total years of service, as well as a 1 to 2 sentence description. And this description can include really any areas of expertise they might have, their professional or educational background, or major accomplishments. And this can be 1 sentence if that's more than sufficient as well. Okay, we have a question. Please clarify the community. Is it audience, musical artists, local residents? Community. So for this application, when we're referencing community or your target audience, this is the audience that your programs are reaching, as well as the location-based community where your organization is based. Usually there's an overlap between the audiences or the people that you're interacting with through your programs and your offerings, as well as geographically who's in your community. So I would recommend mentioning both in your application. But hopefully that answered that question. Will the grant payment be dispersed by NYFA or NYSCA? NYFA will be dispersing the grant payments. We have a question. If an organization already has a sizable reserve in comparison to the size of its operational budget, would this make them less compelling for support? So not necessarily. Organizational need is one aspect of the review criteria. So if there is a big need, maybe your organization's going through a big change or shift at the moment, that might make your application more compelling. Um, uh, but that's just one factor in the review process. For this grant, organizations that are applying to start a reserve fund will be prioritized, but that should not. Organizations who are also building upon their reserve fund are definitely still encouraged to apply. We have a question. Are 501(c)(4) organizations able to apply? No, only 501(c)(3) organizations with a primary mission to support arts and culture would be eligible to apply. We have a question. If our organization has an existing investment account, does that not mean we have an existing reserve fund? So for the purposes of this grant, you would apply to start a reserve fund if your organization does not have a formal reserve policy at the time of applying. If you have an investment account and a reserve policy attached to it, then you can apply to build upon a reserve fund. But if you have savings or funds set aside without a reserve policy, you will apply to start a reserve fund. And then you can still describe the state of your investment account in your application. Let's see, we have a couple more minutes, so I'll give a little bit of time to see if any other questions come in. There are a couple more specific questions. So again, if we don't get to yours today, please reach out to us at apply@nyfa.org. We have a question. Is the grant distribution broken down by operating budget? For example, will there be 10 recipients per funding level? So a certain amount of funding will be placed within each operating budget, but this will be based on how many applications we receive with each funding tier. So that will be determined after applications close. And then the panel review process will be broken down based off of operating budget. Okay, I'll answer one more question. We have a question, can you invest the reserve fund? Yes, so once you receive the reserve fund, you can invest it. Will also be some of our support services will also be going into the different places that you might want to look into putting your reserve fund. And with that, we will wind down our webinar. If you have any lingering questions or if we didn't get to them, please reach out to us at apply@nyfa.org. And thank you so much for spending some time on today's information session. I hope everyone has a good rest of your day.